Hi guys, it's me, that Divination Witch. I hope you're doing well. Back with another episode in the Keys of Life podcast. If you're new here, the podcast is all about us talking with people from all over the world, all different backgrounds, asking about their spiritual beliefs or non-spiritual beliefs, just to show that, look, there's no one right answer. You're not doing anything wrong. Everyone's different. And yeah, hopefully to showcase that. So we're joined here by the lovely Jasmine, who also has her own YouTube channel. It's all linked below. Uh, and yeah, we're going to talk about Jasmine's path and going to find some stuff out, I'm sure. So yeah, if you like that, you know what to do. Hit subscribe. And if you want to check out my things too, all below. Thank you. All right. So hi, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. It's nice to see you. I know you're in America. We were just quickly saying, weren't we? So
Yeah,
it's like, was it
a little
3
bit
in
of
the
a time
afternoon?
difference. Yeah.
Yeah. It's 7 here. So how have you been today? How's your day been? I know that's boring to ask.
No, my day so far is good. It's been a nice, slow day here. We just had our coven's, um, big Sabbath on Saturday, because, the way covenry be set up, sometimes we can't all get together on the actual day. I think it's a Thursday this year. People have kids and trick or treating and XYZ. So it's like that
Mm.
meme where um, oh, we're doing the SBAT on this day because Brenda doesn't have a babysitter or whatever, like the modern witches coven meme. So, kind of coming off the high of that ritual, yesterday I spent some time just kind of like vibing, and I call it like rotting, where you just kind of vibe at home on the couch. And today's kind of been a slow day too. I have stuff going on later. We're gonna like go to the craft store and go get some fun stuff. But yeah, it's been pretty chill.
Yeah. Cool. So, well, you mentioned you've got a coven. Well, not everyone does. So, well, I was going to ask you, well, what would you describe your path and everything? But like,
Yeah.
yeah, what's all this about? What's a coven? And oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So to start with first, people who might not be familiar with my channel, I've been roughly practicing witchcraft, I say like formally, for
Mm.
most of my 20s, about 10 years. I'm 31 now. But I really got interested in witchcraft in my youth, like just the archetype of witch. I think a lot of us can probably feel like we identify with
Yeah.
the marginalized, the other, the weird, the taboo. So as a teenager, like I was always drawn to the witch, be it through watching movies like Practical Magic or The Craft. And then, of course, like books like Scott Cunningham's Encyclopedia of Herbs or Raymond Buckland's Big Blue Book or some of Silver Ravenwolf's stuff, which is like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
it's of its time. And that was kind of my introduction to craft. And now I would say, as I've been, like I said, I say formally, just in the sense that like what I was doing in high school looks nothing like what I'm doing now. Not that that's not craft, but I was also like 15, So like the things we're doing
Mm.
at 15 and our interest at 15 are definitely different than what we're doing at 25 or 30. Um, so, in terms of covenry, because that definitely shapes a lot of my experience now, like I still have my own solitary path and my own solitary practice too, but like I'm also in a coven and part of a tradition. So I kind of like use the equation, and some people don't like this analogy, but like you can have, let's say, four Methodist churches downtown, right? And
Mm.
every Methodist church, based on their worship team or XYZ, might be a little bit different, but all of them at the end of the day are Methodists. And so they have like sort of some unified values and shared worldviews. Even though maybe we go to different Methodist churches, right? We're on that same
Yeah.
thing. So I would say that my denomination, if you will, my tradition, that would be American traditional folkloric witchcraft. And there are
Mm.
covens within that tradition,
Mhm.
um, like Karashi, like Spiral Castle, like Solar Court, which is the coven that I run and facilitate. And we're all kind of related through the lens of our tradition. But
Yeah.
what we're doing in our individual covens can still look really different because, of course, covens all have autonomy. But we're practicing what we refer to as like ATW, or
Mhm.
American Traditional Folkloric Witchcraft.
Mm.
So that informs my practice heavily.
Oh, interesting. I've never met anyone yet, I don't think. And I've met quite a few Americans, and I have Americans that follow me, and yeah, I've never met anyone practicing that. So obviously I'm a British witch. I'm not in a coven. I'm just a solitary witch doing my thing. La la la.
And that's great.
Uh, yeah.
You don't need a coven. Anyone watching, like,
Oh yeah, of
covenry is not a
course.
prerequisite to craft, like,
No,
at
no.
all.
I know. I totally agree. But it's very interesting to hear about it and like about that tradition, you
Yeah.
know? And I
Yeah.
wonder what the differences are then between like obviously the country and the
Yeah.
history, of course, but like
Yeah.
is it similar, would you say, to British witchcraft?
Well, so I am not one to like, I feel like right now in today's witchy world climate, it's like, I don't know, kind of trendy or popular to like poo-poo Wicca, if we're talking
Mm,
about
mm.
that. And like, I don't know, I practiced as like a solitary eclectic Wiccan in my early 20s. A lot of those authors shaped my
Yeah.
practice and my
Well,
experience, of
a lot of
course.
us did, didn't we?
Yeah.
Same, same as you there with when
Yeah.
you were mentioning Silver Raven Wolf, I thought, yeah,
Yeah.
Teen
Yeah.
Witch or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I think that British traditional witchcraft and like Wicca, the lines of Gardner and Alexander's are very influential in ATW. I would say that one of the differences being, I feel like the British were kind of almost like, as far as magical traditions go, I feel like us ATW girlies are like the weird cousins in a way, because we're like related systems. I mean, Robert Cochrane and Gerald Gardner are coming about in the same era, and people have opinions about Robert, people have
yeah, of
opinions
course.
about, Gardner. That's not what we're getting into, but I would say like the Clan of Tubal Cain, 1734 greatly has also influenced ATW, but in ATW, as it's a type of traditional witchcraft, is also like really influenced by the land and like the landscape. So pulling in elements from like our local area is, I think,
Yeah,
one of the big differences. Because, as far as folklore and spirits and like even trees and plants, like our local flora and fauna,
mm,
it's going to be a little bit different than like what we have going on the other side of the pond.
yeah,
So
definitely.
I would say that that would be some big ways. And then there's, of course, other influences specifically throughout, because ATW really kind of kicked off throughout like Appalachia. So we have like the Dutch influence, we have like powwow influence, there's some hoodoo influence, not equating ATW to any of those because it's not, right? But the influence still is undeniable when you have multiple magical traditions
Yeah,
really mixing in this area, as
yeah,
America is like kind of this weird gumbo melting pot of peoples and cultures. So that's another way I would say it's probably different.
yeah. No, it's fascinating to me. That like that's why I wanted to know because even here, I mean, I hope no one takes offense or anything. I don't mean it offensively, but England or the UK, not just England, is a really old country
Yeah,
compared to the USA. But USA is still really old, except it was native, native
right,
traditions. Yeah.
right.
I just know, yeah, there's things that work for you guys that don't quite work for us and vice
Yeah,
versa. So an example is, well, it's not really that something didn't work, but I've got someone on my Patreon who's from Pennsylvania, and there's big like powwow influence there. And uh, so long story short, I don't want to give her personal info away, but
sure.
I give her some advice on like, and so did Hecate through me on how to like ease her cigarette cravings, when you're like going through it. It wasn't to quit smoking or anything like that, because that's a whole different kettle of fish. It was just to help. And well, I'm just giving it away here. We Hecate said, put the energy in a potato, right? And bury this potato. So we did. Well, I physically did. Now I'm on camera, like giving her advice, and it got like dug up, but it wasn't like a physical animal that did it. It was just like miraculous. There was no claw marks. There was nothing. It was just on the top, like no animal had got it. And what she described, what she saw, made me think of the fae, but it wouldn't be the fae for you. And long story short, it was a squonk, something called a squonk.
Yeah, here we have things that we call cryptids. So like
Yeah,
the squonk, La Chupacabra, Bigfoot, the Goat Man, the Skunk Ape. Yeah, okay, so speaking of Fae, I would say this as an American witch, as someone within the tradition of ATW, not to speak for the tradition, but I think a lot of us would view the concept of like Fae and like cryptids as kind of related because even the Appalachian Mountain region, per like, the continent splitting and
that's
Pangea, like
Scotland.
our mountains are related geologically to the
Yeah,
same mountain range. So like spirits of the land, elementals, even genus loci in a way, I think is very related because they're geologically like sister mountain ranges. So I think there's that. And then also like we have a ton of native lore here that was
yeah,
here
oh
well
yeah,
before, colonialization, because really the United States, I mean, Indiana became a state in like 1816. That's
nothing.
really only 5 generations ago-ish. That's not that long, you know?
Yeah. It made me
So
think, like when that happened, and this is where I mean, like, I don't mean it bad in any way, but the Fae over here, I mean, I just call them all the Fae, and even for us, so the Appalachian Mountains end in Scotland technically, and
yeah,
even Scotland, you've got the Loch Ness Monster, you've got
yeah,
Kelpies, that's a cryptid,
yeah,
really, isn't it?
yeah.
Uh, exactly, you're right. And the Fae over here, I feel like they're more used to us, if you get what I mean. As in, it's not that this is just me speaking, okay?
Sure.
But I don't want to say you've said this or anything, but you know how like native cultures anywhere in the world are very connected with the land, and yet
Yeah,
you're more at one with the land and the spirits of the
yeah,
land. Now people come along and colonize and whatever, and they've got their big cities and states that have not
yeah.
existed very long. I think the creatures are still getting used to all of that, and
Oh, yeah.
that's what I theorize, anyways.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think so recently I've made some videos on my channel, but like I've reconnected with my biological father side of my family, who I never really knew, like not
Yeah.
even in like a sad way. I just didn't really know that part of my family. My stepdad, he's like my dad, right? Obviously I have a father, but I never really knew him. And so recently I've been able to reconnect with my biological, like paternal side of my family, and I found out like a whole bunch of history that I never knew was part of we call it our red soul. Our red
Hmm.
soul being what connects us to our mighty dead, as in our ancestors, or our craft ancestors, and our beloved dead, our
Hmm.
literal ancestors. So I never knew this whole part of my red soul up until this. And like
Hmm.
finding out all of this French aspect that is on my father's side of the family kind of inspired me to look into more French style witchcraft and French lore because I just wasn't familiar with it really prior to. And
Yeah.
discovering a bunch of really interesting stuff, even in my state of Indiana, through French colonialization, which horrible history, but like these immigrants, these European immigrants, when they came and colonized the States through the 13 colonies, also, I think, brought with them a lot of their folk practices from their mother countries because we have those influences even here. Like the Melusine, for example, who's like this two-tailed serpent fish-like looking mermaid, almost kind of like the Starbucks logo, who is similar to like an initiatory figure of like Aradia, but she's like part of French lore. We have her painted like on barns out here. And that's something
Hmm.
that's like very uniquely kind of French. Or we have a ton of werewolf lore through all of the German settlements in our area. Like that was definitely brought here, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
So I think we as Americans, like, of course, it's different because we're on different like lands, literally. But I also feel like these settlers brought with them a lot of these folk practices and spirits as they came and colonized and settled here. And then that mixing with the magic and the spirits that were already native to here.
Yeah.
Yeah. You
Like
know
a
what I'm
big
saying?
melting, yeah,
Yeah.
big melting pot. It is, it's true. It's the same throughout history though, except you guys as a whole in the States are still like, I don't know, adapting to it all. The spirits,
Yeah.
everyone is still learning and adapting to it. Like you could say the same over here. It literally happened in the UK. One of my ancestral gods is Sulis Minerva because the Romans invaded the UK and then they took the Celtic goddess Sulis, healing goddess, and conflated her with Minerva, and then boosh, there you go. Like it happens, doesn't it? All these cultures, we all mishmash, and really we're all connected. Some for good reason, some for not. We know that. I'm not excusing that, of course, but it's fascinating though. So with you then on your path, so obviously that's what you practice and everything, and like how did you get into that? Like how did you find your practice, what it is now? I know you mentioned briefly Wicca in high
Yeah.
school.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like for a lot of my early 20s, it was just kind of fucking around and finding out. Like, I didn't necessarily at that time have any sort of formalized training in any tradition. I was just kind of following the own rhythm of my heart and my desires and my will and kind of going with what resonates with me. And a few years ago, I became friends through YouTube, actually. Her channel name is Taya Kennedy. She's a Canadian.
All right.
And she makes a lot of wonderful traditional witchcraft content. She hasn't in a little while, but fabulous. And she and I kind of became friends through us both being creators here on YouTube. And we were talking, and she was telling me about this online craft academy that she got interested in, which is called the Red Thread Academy. And just, as friends talking and whatever, and how are you and what's going on and blah, blah, blah. So I was really interested in the Red Thread Academy because it sounded like this cool, self paced, online, traditional witchcraft academy, but with like an American flavor and lens as opposed to like
Mm.
British.
Hmm.
Because I'm not British,
Yeah.
and so I was like, oh, that sounds cool. So I went to go check it out. And then I found out that so it's a 3-year program. You can do 1 year at a time. I'm in no sponsored, like I'm not sponsored in any way to talk about this. This is just, it's part of
Yeah.
my path. Um, so I looked into it, and I think it was in 2001. There were two women, Natalie Long and Lorelei Black, which are both very prolific priestesses here in our area here. Lorelei has written several books on traditional witchcraft, but also on like Aphrodite work. And Natalie's great as well. They had a blog, which I'll try to remember to send you the link to in case anyone wants to check out. It's called American Folkloric Witchcraft. And they were married partners that were also kind of reviving this tradition going back in like 2001. And the American Folkloric Witchcraft blog kind of started to grow from a blog to more like a community. And then from a community to like there being like groups, right? So then like the coven Karashi was kind of founded, which then split when Natalie and Lorelei split. One went and stayed in Indy, one moved further south, and that coven split to Crossroads and to Spiral Castle. And anyway, all that to be said, the Red Thread Academy is like teaching American traditional witchcraft, but like through the lens of the Spiral Castle coven
Hmm.
specifically. Um, and yeah, it's like this 3-year program. I'm in my 3rd year of it now. I just entered my 3rd year. You can do 1 year, 2 year, you could do all three, whatever. And it's basically designed as this year and a day sort of course through the degrees of first, second, and third degree within like the tradition,
Yeah.
which is a much younger tradition too. I mean, American traditional witchcraft existed through various traditions and modalities before, but like ATW as we know it today is really like one generation old. You know what I mean? Like it's a very much a neo tradition in the
Hmm.
sense that it's not like, I don't know, I think some people hear traditional witchcraft and they think of like the witch cults of Western Europe and like Margaret Murray's thesis. But even Wicca, like, I mean, really, we're talking like 1950,
Oh
1960.
yeah, it's
If we're
nothing
talking like
really.
on paper, you know?
Yeah.
So older inspirations and currents and threads that are pulled, sure, but like as on paper, what we know it today, we're
Hmm.
talking like our parent. I mean, I don't know exactly how old you are. I assume that we're both like
Oh,
millennials, but like
I'm
probably our
35.
okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're still yeah. So like we're talking like our parents' generation.
Yeah. Yeah. But that, no, that, well, that seems interesting though, because everything starts somewhere at the end of the day.
Yeah.
That's the way I see it. And I know there's some things out there that are like, but that is, to me, it's reconnecting with your roots and like finding common ground, commonality, a community.
Yeah.
Really cool.
Yeah, taking it back to my friendship with Haya. So she's in Canada, right? And like so
Yeah.
she was telling me about this academy and how much she was enjoying it. And I am always very much like I'm a student first. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? At the end of the day, like I'm a student first. And so I'm always wanting to pursue higher knowledge and seek after that first pillar, that first power being to know oneself, to know thy craft. I'm a slut for books. Okay,
I'm the
we love
same.
it. You know, I love it. And so I was like, let me check out this academy because this sounds really cool. And I always say it's kind of funny that it took a Canadian witch to kind of bring me back to
Yeah.
that I live on because this tradition really kind of started in the Midwest and in Appalachia, and that's exactly where I live. And so this magic was really in my own backyard, and these priestesses that were facilitating this work were my neighbors. One of them I live 10 minutes from, and we're good friends now today, but it's crazy to think that like, you know, I'm reading stuff
You didn't
online and I'm
know.
purchasing their books and I'm like, oh, this is great. And you always assume that, you know, these cool people must live in some cool place and it can't be here. And then come to find out one of them lives just 10 minutes away from me in the same city. Like I could almost ride a bike to her house. Like nuts.
Yeah. Obviously meant to happen though. You
Yeah.
obviously were meant to find it. That's interesting. So with this practice as well, or your personal practice, does anyone work with any deities? Because I know for me, I mean that's a big. I'm a pagan as well as a witch, so don't know for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say so for myself, not speaking for the tradition, but for myself, like looking to our ancestry and looking to like cultural practices that relate to our ancestry because um you know, my ancestors came here through very horrific means into this country and I'm not indigenous whatsoever that I know of. Okay. So I don't really feel like that's appropriate for me. I don't think it's appropriate ever to just like cherry pick and take and, you know,
Mm-mm.
just kind of disrespect traditions and whatever. So I think looking at our cultural ancestry of where did our ancestors come from? Like I brought up France, and looking into that, that heavily inspires my practice. Or like my mother's side of my family actually immigrating from the Middle East and looking into all of these magical traditions that come from the Fertile Crescent, that come from Lebanon, Palestine, you know, Syria, XYZ. So folklore, like there's a book called Abu Jamil's Daughter, which is a folktale book of folk stories from Lebanon and Palestine. So it's kind of things like that really
Yeah.
influence just my personal practice. I still also um, keep the 8 Sabbats. Like the witch's wheel is different for us through ATW because it's about kind of tweaking it to match our landscape. So we're not necessarily doing like the neo pagan or the Wiccan Imbolc, Ostara, Beltane. They're kind of
Mm.
tweaked to match our Midwestern landscape. And so, you know, we do kind of have different names for them and different correspondences for them than
Yeah.
maybe like more commonly within neo-paganism would or what Wiccans would. And then in ATW, um, there are spirits and gods and familiars that are associated with the tradition overall. And
Mm.
some of that I'm not necessarily at liberty to talk in full detail about because it is an initiatory practice. But I will say that there is like a trinity, like a main trinity of the black goddess, the white goddess, and the red god that are known by different names. There's
Mm.
the witch's devil. There are animal and plant familiars and allies that we work with. Um, and also, like going back to our red soul, our beloved and our mighty dead and the trinity of the red, white, and black is really found throughout the tradition because we have like the three soul paradigm, the white soul, the red soul, the black soul. The white soul connecting us to the star forge heavens above, like the cosmos, the red soul connecting us to our blood and to our ancestors, be it by literal bloodline or craft bloodline, like Mighty Dead, like Dorian Valiente, like Gerald Gardner, like Robert Cochran. And then we have our black soul, which like connects us with the land, and our fetch spirit being like a form of witch's skin that they take to attend the Sabbath. Um, I would also say that the tradition has some Luciferian streams throughout it as well. And I think that that would apply also to like 1734 and Clan of Tubal-Cain. The tradition has quite a bit of biblical influence, which I know sometimes can be a hot topic for some witches because, you know, we come from some other organized religions sometimes and into this tradition. And it's like sometimes we just want nothing to do with anything from the previous religion that we came from. But the concept of like the witch mother and the witch father, the concept of like Cain as an initiator of witches, or Tabello Cain, as I think his grandson, the concept of like the Grigori, the angels that, depending on the version of the story you read, had offspring with the daughters of Cain and birthed the Nephilim, the giants. Also, the story of the Gospel of Witches, the Vangelo, with Aradia being kind of like this witch messiah who is also an initiator of witches. So, books that I personally would recommend for anyone who might be interested in learning more about this specific tradition and specific way of practice. First of all, I think reading just some foundational traditional witchcraft books, like I love Keldon Mercury's book, The Crooked Path. I love his book, The Witch's Sabbath. Those are really great introductory books. I also really like a lot of Gemma Gary's work, The Black Toad. I like a lot of Roger Horn's work, like To Ride a Broom at Midnight, 13 Gates of Witchflight. That very much inspired me in my own Witchflight book writing. I really also like a lot of Marshall's work, The Witch of Southern Light. I love Cunning Words. He also just released a new book, The Red Mother. That all has very trad witch American flavor to it, as he's from Texas. Also, Kobe Michael's work, not necessarily in relation to traditional witchcraft, but herbalism and the poison path and witchflight are all very central to ATW. So reading like The Poison Path that Kobe wrote about working with poisonous herbs and making ointments and witchflight, Astral Travel, we call it witchflight. Those are all really great books. I'm sure there's more that I'm just not thinking of at the
Yeah.
moment.
You've listed
Slewfoot.
some amazing. Yeah, you remember things more than me. I'm like, yeah, I know some of these. I can't remember everyone, but yeah, Poison Path. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I love him. He's so good. Yeah.
Slewfoot is a fiction book, okay?
Hmm.
But it takes place in the New Colonies, and the main
All
character
right,
is
cool.
she's the daughter of a cunning woman that gets shipped off to the New World to be a bride in the New Colonies. And the story takes place in 1666 Connecticut, which is just delicious. And she ends up living kind of on the fringe of the village. So she's on the edge of the wood, and tragedy befalls the man that she was supposed to marry. And so she's trying to keep this homestead as this young, petite woman living on the edge of town. And she ends up pacting with and making good relations with this spirit that's known by multiple names. The Puritans call him devil or Satan. And
Mm-hmm.
there's these entities known as wild folk, which are basically like kind of like fairies. They call him father, and she calls him Slewfoot. And so the paradigm of like looking at the witch's devil of, is this Christian or is this pagan? I think that that book, Slewfoot, as a fiction book, we can pull a lot of gnosis and inspiration from, in the sense that the witch's devil can be both, you know, the
Yeah.
old horned god, but
Hmm.
also the devil, you know, like
Yeah.
bringing those paradigms together. So, um, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
With you saying that, you've unlocked a memory. When I was like 14 or something, like that's when I first started. But this is not about me really, but back then, I think what inspired me, it is a teen fiction book, but you might be interested in it. It's called Witch Child by Celia Rees. I remember that. It's burned in my brain.
Okay.
So it is just for teens, but it was about a pilgrim, I don't know what you'd call her, but from I think Ireland or somewhere, settles in the colonies, and then she's accused of being a witch when she isn't. So it's not really like mega into the craft, but she falls in love with a native guy and they run away together. And then there is a sequel
Oh,
about her descendant who is native. Uh, and she is reading all about her grandma and stuff and finding stuff out about her. But I just thought, yeah, it's unlocked a memory
it's
if
called
you're
The Witch
interested.
Child.
Witch Child, yeah, just tell you it
Yeah,
after.
that sounds like
I'll
something that's
try.
right up my alley. So I'd love to check
Yeah,
that out. And also too, like, if anyone ever watching this, like whenever they do, if you have any fiction recommendations, like please send them my way because I've just gotten into like reading more witchy fiction because I used to have this weird hang up about it where I'm like, no, we're only reading nonfiction books. And like I've opened the door to reading fiction and yeah, I love it. And I love finding little threads of like true craft within fiction. I know some people are like, oh, pop
yeah,
culture and the craft. Whatever. I think that everything comes from somewhere. Even like
yeah.
the Agatha All Along TV
I
show
know.
that
I
she
was
was,
gonna say I've been watching it, and oh my
yeah,
God, like the fact that Patty LuPone's character is the
yes,
divination witch. I'm like, yes,
yes.
queen.
Yes. Or, they have the witch's ballad of the witch's road. And I think
Hmm.
that's such a beautiful metaphor for the crooked path, the
Hmm.
spiral path, the witch's way that we as witches, like in reality, in the real world,
Hmm.
experience and walk both liminally and metaphorically
Hmm.
and literally. So I think if you look at pop culture and you keep an open mind, I think a lot of us can find little threads of truth that we can pull
Yeah,
on and weave into our own
because we're all
tangible,
linked.
real practice.
Yeah, we're all linked together. Like even like so back in the day, mythologies, I always take it with a grain of salt. But it's the same thing. It was the fiction of the times. And like it's
Hmm.
funny you said that's a crooked path because I immediately thought, oh, this is like the Sephiroth, like doing the tree of
Hmm.
life or something, the Cliffoth, and they're doing
Hmm.
little tasks as they go along. It's
Hmm.
and there you go. It links with the crooked path. It links with Yggdrasil. It links with whatever. It's
Yeah.
all connected. Yeah. Who's your favorite in that? Since we're just randomly talking about it.
Oh gosh. I mean, they're all great, aren't they? I think, I don't know, I especially love Agatha's wickedness. Like, I don't know, she's just kind of wicked and kind of cunning and kind of conniving. And I don't know, I like that. And I also really like the potions witch. I forget that
Yeah.
character's name, but like I think she's a lot of fun. Um, yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
The last episode, like that tarot episode,
I know.
took me and I was so impressed because like I love RWS, Rider Waite Smith Tarot. I love that language of tarot. And watching it, I'm like, okay, someone really did their research here because a lot of times in movies or in film or TV shows, they kind of just like fudge meanings of
Mm.
cards, like they lay out the death card and they're like, you're going to die.
Yeah. No. It's
Um, and I feel like the people that were directing this last episode, someone must have knew some tarot because they were on it. And then that, not to spoil anything for anyone who still hasn't watched it, but there's a particular scene where one of the witches she's at a crossroads and she's like, I'm going to go to my trial. I'm going to go this way. I would like you to come with me. And the other homegirl is like, why? Like, we could leave. And she's like, because you're my sister in the craft. Oh, I was
oh,
gutted.
that's cute.
I was gutted. I was like, oh my God.
Yeah. There's a funny thing I noticed. It wasn't the last episode. I took a picture of it because I thought, are you for real, Disney? So they keep going on about sigils well, by the time this comes out, sorry if you haven't watched it, spoiler, like because Billy's name,
Yeah.
uh, they keep going on about sigils. So when he's researching, I think it was in the episode about him. There's a flashback and he's got stuff all on his wall and he's researching, and I'm like, hold up, I know them sigils. Oh, they only had the Goetia on the wall. I was
Hmm.
like, are you for real, Disney? Put the Goetia on the wall.
Yes. And speaking of that, like, I don't know if you're familiar with the Halloween Town.
Oh yeah,
Okay. Grandma Weatherwack, I forget her name, but like there's a scene that one of my siblings in the craft, one of my brothers of cloak will say, he sent me a screenshot because he was watching it and he was like, is that the goetic seal for like Azazel in the background?
Oh,
Like,
really? Is
and it
Hazel,
is.
oh, the symbol of Saturn?
Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
like, okay.
In fairness, I mean, I don't know, in fairness, because the symbol of Saturn can be used differently if it's a
It's the
Hazel.
one that is like the lines that kind of look like an hourglass. It's not like
Yeah.
cursive H.
Oh, right. Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
his symbol. I'm not describing it very well, but it goes like boop, 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 boop,
Oh, no,
boop.
I get, yeah, I think it's like triangle-y. I think
Yeah.
it's the symbol of Saturn, really, but it is used for him. But
Yeah.
still, it's like that's in a Disney kids film. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the lore with him and, you know, him also kind of being an initiator of witches,
Oh
very
yeah,
much
he is. I
like
love him.
him bringing that flame of enlightenment and also kind of like a Prometheus vibe and like him being an
Hmm.
initiator of witches and looking to that mythology and seeing, you know, okay, maybe it's not just fire, maybe it's like the flame of enlightenment or like the witch fire, you know,
Yeah. Yeah,
and the
yeah.
gods being like, how dare you give that to the mortals? Like, yeah,
Yeah. I love Azazel. That's funny
me
you
too.
mention it. So have
Me
you
too.
worked with Azazel or any other, like I know you mentioned deities in your practice right now
Yeah.
in your certain, yeah, I forgot the word, it's gone out of my head, tradition.
Yeah. So
I'm
like
having a
I would
mind
say
fart.
Cain, I would say Cain specifically as kind of like because there's like trinities within trinities, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So like our red god, our witch's devil, our Cain, and then kind of like our Lucifer and our Azazel, like as two sort of polarized central forces with like the light and the dark half of the year.
Mm-hmm. Mm. And that could also link in. I know it's different, obviously, but I'm sure it's Celtic mythology, one of the Celtic ones. See, people use Celtic as a big umbrella term.
Yeah.
I had an Irish witch on here before. You might have seen that one. Uh, it's not all the same. It depends which country and all of this. But there is the Holly King and the Oak King, and
Yeah.
it's a whole thing. Yes, reminds us of that.
Mhm. Yeah, we
All
have
linked.
a lot of those same paradigms, like the oak and holly, or like the gold and the silver, or like Kor and Persephone,
Yeah, yeah.
the white
Cool.
and the black goddess. Yeah,
Yeah, cool. I like that.
yeah, me
Well,
too.
why am I not American? Anyways.
Just fly over. Just fly
Uh,
over.
okay.
It's a very troubling time right now, you
Oh
know.
God, it's over here too. So
Country.
I know. I mean, we'll see what happens. But yeah, I don't know if it can get any worse. I don't know. No, that's very privileged of me to say that actually. So I won't say that. So, yeah. Another question I ask people is, do you have a favorite part of your practice? So obviously me, divination. Is there a favorite sort of spell you like to do? Or
Um,
anything that's like, yeah, I love doing this.
You know, to take it back to Agatha all along, when the Missy girl is having her scene where she's having all the witches go through the Iron Maiden, and right before she closes the door, she says, I loved being a witch.
Oh,
Gutted,
oh
gutted
no.
me. I love being a witch. Like I love divination, right? Like I love RWS tarot. I love throwing the bones. I love using a keek stone or our black mirror scrying. I love fiber art magic. I love the metaphor of weaving being
Yeah,
used as like weaving a spell, you know, whether it be like witch's eyes, God's eyes, witch's ladders, witch cords, cat's cradles, and like using literal yarn in magic through different sort of means. And then also having that represented with red yarn or the red thread or like black or white per that trinity. But honestly, I feel like a central part of my practice would be witchflight, and that's what I ended up writing my first book about was witchflight. Dream walking, astral travel. For the sake of this, I specifically refer to it as witch flight. I really feel like So at that time, we have a ritual in our coven that we do every witch's night or every Samhain. And part of that ritual involves us working with a particular spirit, the devil, and invoking him into our space and asking the devil to pact us with like a working familiar for the coming witches year. So from the third harvest of that year to the third harvest of the following year being like the witches year. And the familiar that you are pacted with, you know, the first time you can take it or you can leave it, or you can draw again and like ask for another one. You're stuck with your second one, or you don't get one at all, is the way that we do things to add a layer of mercy and severity to the work. And whatever spirit you get, the idea is that this is your working familiar. So it's not to say that you can't have other familiars, because I would say that traditional witches and spirit work and sorcery and spirit conjuration is like integral to the practice. And even witches of lore, like pacting with spirits out in the woods. And it's very tradcrafty flavor. You know, there's a particular reason that this spirit is manifesting to kind of have this business-like relation. You know what I mean? Like this spirit is going to offer you X, Y, or Z for your practice. And in return, they're going to expect X, Y, or Z as a payment. Because in our tradition, we very much hold the belief that all magic requires sacrifice. So with that being said, not last year, but year before, I was pacted with this particular spirit. And when I went to the Hallowed Woods, which is a specific place that within our tradition and in our coven, we kind of experience throughout, right? And that's something that layers in, like there's a difference with UPG, right? Which is powerful. And, you know, that unverified personal gnosis really becomes verified when you have a group of witches weaving together that then unrelated have shared gnosis that overlaps, and finding that overlapping thread and that overlapping gnosis. If all of us are venturing to this similar place and describing a similar place, maybe we're not all necessarily calling it the Hallowed Woods because it's known by other names. But that's like a tangible thing in the other world that we can reliably venture to communicate with spirits, to pact with them, to consort with them magically and in other adult ways. Because that's a part of my practice and our tradition, as well as that consorting that takes place. So she basically was like, I want you to write this book. And I was like, girl, do you have the right witch? Like, I'm from down here. I'm over here down in the holler, babe. Like, you want me to write a book? What am I going to write a book on? And she was like, write this book on Witchflight. And I'm like, me? I don't know, babe. I don't know if you got the right witch. And so it was, you know, Esbats or several lunar ceremonies of communication before I was like, okay, I approached this work, which is, I'm going to do a little self promo here. Ambrosia's Book of Witchflight here. This was my first one. This is available on Amazon, self published through Kindle, Amazon Kindle, whatever that is. KDP. And so basically, it's not necessarily like a how-to book. I don't really want to position myself or take on that responsibility of having to write a how-to book. Plus, if I'm being honest, I think there's a lot of how-to books out there already that are fabulous and that I would rather just recommend. But I noticed sort of this gap in our witchcraft liturgy, where if you're interested in astral travel or spirit flight or witch flight, most of the literature out there is actually being written from more of what I would consider to be like new age thought. And that's so not my vibe. There's not a whole lot out there about spirit flight, witch flight from a traditional witch's lens. And some of the books I mentioned earlier, like Robert J. Horne's book, 13 Gates of Witch Flight to Ride a Broom at Midnight, that's a really good one, but that's one of very few. And also, even in that work, it's more about just general information on how to rip your spirit from your body and travel the other world. But like no one's really sharing or writing about their experiences in the other world. And so that's what I felt very tasked with from the familiar spirit I was pacted with that year, to not write a book to tell people, this is what flying ointment is, and this is how to make it, and this is how to visualize, and this is how to meditate, and this is how to go into trance, and this is how to seethe, and this is how to pull your spirit from your body. Not to position myself like that, but to say, this is my experience having done this. These are these realms I have gone to. These are these spirits I have met or consorted with. So in that book, the first part of it is just a little general information about flight. The second part of it is personal journal entries from my flight experiences. The third part is like kind of a mini spirit codex, or like a Pokedex of spirits, if you will. I think there's 86 in that. And then the last part is some recipes, some rituals, and some conjurations and creations of magical tools for otherworldly sorcery. So that's that book. And then this year, I just released Ambrosia's Book of Spirits, which is like expanding upon the Spirit Codex and the Witchflight book. So there's 122 spirits instead of 86, because it's been a year since I wrote that.
Yeah.
So I've had more interactions with spirits. And then I expanded the correspondences, taking a lot of inspiration from previous grimoire traditions, like the Grimoire Verum, the Lesser and Greater Keys of Solomon, the Legamenton, the Pseudemonarchia Demonium. So like planetary correspondences, royal arcana correspondences, color correspondences, attributes like grants prestige, gives good familiars. And then I also included personal gnosis of mine, of like my experience with this particular spirit, and also the experiences of other witches in the SCC, the Solar Court
Mhm.
Coven, and my editor, who
Mm.
Witchflight was very new to. She was just editing my work. She kind of was getting into practicing witchcraft, but she hadn't done much flight prior to. Through editing the book, spirits started coming to her from the book, like meeting her in the
Mm.
midworld or meeting her in our dreamscape. So there's some entries from her in that book as well. And then the third and final book that I plan to release in terms of the Witchflight series should be released by the end of this year. And it's going to be Ambrosia's Book of Sorcery, again, following sort of some Solomonic current, not Solomonic magic, but how Solomon has the Testament of Solomon and the Greater and Lesser Key. I feel like my testament is the Witchflight book. And then my lesser key would be the Book of Spirits. And then the greater key, being the Book of Rituals, Ambrosia's Book of Sorcery, is a book written with the intention of these are rituals and forms of magic directly related to otherworldly sorcery. So I'm very
Mm.
excited about that.
Sounds fascinating. It does. Uh, I mean, everything. Like, I'm trying to process what have I just heard. Like, it sounds like mind blowing. I mean, even how you describe your witch flight and stuff. Like when I practice it, it seems so different. But then there could be commonality, couldn't there, as well? Like,
Yeah.
it just, yeah, that's really cool. Go check it out, guys. It'll be linked below. But yeah, no, I'm interested to see what these spirits are as well. I might have. You never know. I might know these spirits too.
Yeah, I think that I sent you a PDF of I think the first and the second. Um, and so I
Yeah.
don't know if you had a chance to take a look at that or not, but I do think that some of the spirits from the book, you know, I want to say that these spirits are not necessarily like just fabricated creations of my imagination. Some of
Mm,
these spirits are spirits just found within the ATW tradition that other witches of our tradition would identify with.
yeah.
Like the gold and silver queen, for example. But I think that that concept of the gold and silver queen can be recognized by even witches outside of our tradition, maybe by other names,
Yeah,
but like a
exactly.
similar
Yeah.
resonance, you know?
Yeah.
So, or like the oak and holly, for example, the witch's devil, for example, the witch
Mm,
council, the owl woman. Like there are various spirits that I think that other people would
mm,
definitely be like, okay, something about this resonates. And then
yeah.
there are some spirits that like are lesser known because maybe like there just isn't as much written out there about
Yeah.
them. Um, and my hope with these books being out in the aether is I would like to see more witches writing from their own UPG. We have so many books, so many wonderful books, and some not so great about the basic 101. And not to say that we shouldn't have newer versions of that because things change and update over time. But how many 101 witchcraft books does the culture
Yeah.
really need? It would
Yeah.
be really cool to see more personal works of gnosis from
Yeah.
I'm a witch and here's what that looks like.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I think people are afraid. I'll be quite honest. Well, first, the PDFs, I don't think I've seen them, so I'll have to ask you about that. I don't think I've seen them,
If
but
I if
I'll
I
I'll
fail to
ask
send
you.
them to you, I'll resend them to you after this.
Yeah. Oh, but
Maybe we can
honestly,
do a
I am
part
a
two.
chaotic, I'm a bloody chaotic mess, man. This is what I told you when we briefly spoke. I'm like,
Yeah.
sometimes, when you read things, like anyone out there, if you sent me a message, I try and reply to everyone. Sometimes you read it and then I think I've replied and then I get busy.
Oh, no
I'm
worries. I
very
do the
like that.
same thing. I do the same thing.
Yeah.
And my TBR list is a mile long anyway. Like right now, I'm working through Tabello's Green Fire and I'm working through Marshall's The Red Mother. And I also just got these editions of Hellbore, which is like a tradcraft magazine, but they're actually like
Oh,
little
I've seen
drawings.
there's a look. I've never watched it. Watched it, read it, but
Yeah.
there's a
I just
local
got
witch
the,
near me. She's got
yeah,
them. Yeah,
yeah.
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 Are
So
they
I
good?
found about this and I was like, ooh, that just makes my witch blood tingle. So I
Yeah.
ordered
Oh,
those.
I
So
like that
I understand.
expression.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
But
I'm
if
very
you do check them
like
out after, if you do check them
it's.
out after I send
I
them to you, it'd
will.
be cool to do a part two.
Yeah, yeah. We ca Because I think for me, I feel like I've really risked a lot of things sometimes and put myself out there. Like Hecate is my everything, to be honest. Like I just follow her guide and she wanted me to start this YouTube in the first place. And like
Hmm.
some of the series I'm doing, like this podcast is because of Hecate. She's got wisdom in this. She's probably, linked with some of these spirits. She will be. She's the goddess of witches after all. She's
Yeah,
linked with
definitely.
everything. But yeah, she wants people to see different points of view. I know that. And because there is
Yeah.
no right and wrong answer, and there's too much BS out there as well. Yeah, lots of beginner things, but also there's lots of problematic people in the occult and witchy circles, and there's
Hmm.
stuff out there. It's like, what are you doing? Very predatory, let's say. But for me, even sharing like the deities I've met, and like I've got a series, I'm trying to branch out more into spirits as well, because I've met loads of types of spirits myself, even just
Hmm.
doing readings for people. Like one, I think I've briefly touched on it before on the channel, but one, a guy from Turkey got a reading from me, just asking about what spirits are around his house, and I met basically the Turkish version of the Fae, like through it. Like everywhere in the world we've all just got fantastic things, but I think people are afraid because I know myself, don't know about you on your channel, but I've had backlash through sharing my things, like you get called names, you get called bullshit, and like most of it, it's water off a duck's back, but it can make you think, oh, am I crazy? Like, you know what I mean? People are
Yeah.
very judgmental and harsh. So I just stick with it. You've got to have a thick skin, and I think it takes a special sort of person like yourself as well to actually you're putting yourself out there like me on YouTube even you're being vulnerable at times, you're putting your personal gnosis out there. Not everyone has the guts. I'm not meaning to have a big head or anything, but I think that's why.
Well, okay, to relate it back to the witch's ballad, of course, like even the ballad speaks to the witch's road of all that's foul and fair,
Yeah,
right? The
true.
ballad speaks to where all that's bad is good. Like,
Yeah.
we're witches and witchcraft, it can be tough and it can be scary.
Hmm.
And I think it's okay to be. I think it's perfectly fine to be scared. But like the ballad says, we march ever forward, right?
Oh yeah,
Like we
you've got
continue
to.
in our, yeah. So I totally understand. And also too, sometimes it's not safe for some people to,
Yeah.
necessarily share things so publicly and openly, maybe like a YouTube channel, right? Or but
Yeah.
there's layers of protection. I mean, I know authors that write under a pen name, like
Yeah.
I know creators that never show their face, like that have a
Yeah, true.
digital, creation that speaks
Well, you're
from
right.
that. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that everyone has to kind of assess what their own level of need is around that, because I don't think anyone should necessarily risk like their housing or their job or like custody of their children, because witchcraft can very much place witches sometimes in danger by radical zealotous reactionary people.
Oh, yeah.
And we need to protect ourselves. But at the same time, I think that the spirit of modern craft as we know it today is forged by the witches of the past who kind of poured their red soul into the collective magic well of the spirit of modern craft as we know it. And I think as witches, it's in some ways also our responsibility to pour our red soul back into that well. Because think about it, what are witches in 25 years, in 50 years, in 100 years going to think of the writings of like some of, witches on TikTok that have put out books? Like
Yeah.
those are going to still be circulating somewhere in the aether. And how are witches going to view the content that witches of today created? Like how you and I are talking about witches of the 90s or early 2000s. We look back to those witches and we're like, okay, we're going to continue to pull this thread, but we're going to leave that spool, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And even YouTube videos. Like this is almost like a digital grimoire. If YouTube
Yeah.
is still a thing as a platform and it's still relevant, what are witches in 10 years, 25 years going to think? I've been on YouTube for 10 years. I've made content throughout my 20s. I go back, I watch some of my old videos and I'm like, look at that young woman. You know what I mean? And like sometimes I cringe. I'll be honest. Sometimes I'm like, oh,
Oh,
honey.
I'm the
You know what I
same.
mean?
And
Um,
you've learned so much more since then as
yeah,
well. And,
yeah.
I'm the same.
So, and I
Yeah.
think that's very true. I mean, imagine if like some of the witches of the past, like Robert Cochrane or Andrew Chumbly or Doreen Valiente or Margaret Murray, imagine if they had Instagrams and YouTubes that we could go
Yeah.
back and we could go watch their videos,
Yeah.
like
Mhm.
imagine Aleister Crowley's Patreon, like, or
Oh,
his
God.
OnlyFans, to be fair.
Oh, yeah, it
He'd
will be
have
OnlyFans for sure.
So I think media and how that influences the modern spirit of craft is so influential because media has changed so much since the 50s.
Mhm.
Witches, older witches, right? They talk about how they had to walk to the library and there was only one book and you had to hope that it was there, or they had to borrow books and they had to hear about other groups and practices from, people in their local area. Ovens were writing letters to each other. Who writes? I mean, pen pals, like that's so romantic and like nostalgic to think about,
Mhm.
but now like we get emails like our coven through Mandragora Magica, which I believe is international. It's an online registry for various groups, so anyone listening, maybe if you're
Mhm.
thinking about looking for a group, check out Mandragora Magica. I think you can select by country and like by,
Yeah, I've
it's
never even
kind of like
heard of it.
Witchbox. It's kind
All
of like
right.
how the old Witchbox was.
Yeah.
So we get emails through that. And like some of the emails we get, I'm like, I bet some of the covens of the past were getting some interesting letters too.
Yeah. You do
Um,
get as even as creators some questions and
yeah,
like it is,
yeah,
but we are more connected than ever now, and I think people forget that. And I think there's a lot of issues, let's say, with social media in general as well.
yeah.
Like,
It's a blessing and a curse. It's foul and it's fair.
exactly, it is. You're right. But no, I agree that, yeah, if only more people would speak out, put your voice out there in some way, it would be better. Yeah, cool. I'm just checking the time quick. Yeah, I'm gonna have to wrap things up, okay? But is there
Yeah.
anything else you wanted to share or before we go or anything?
I don't, thank you for having me. This has been really fun. Hopefully I didn't babble like too
No,
much. I
you,
have a tendency of just sometimes word vomit channeling. So,
yeah. No,
um,
no, I'm the same. No, this is what it's all about, right? We want the podcast for people to talk. So thank you. You talked.
yeah, thank you for having me on.
Oh, no problem. Well, you take care and maybe come back on again or something,
Yeah, I'll look and see and try to send you those PDFs again and everything. And yeah, I'd love
Yeah,
to do
we'll have
a
that.
chapter too.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Well, for now, I'll do my little outro. I'll just say thanks for listening or watching, whatever it may be that you did. And if you like it, you may as well hit subscribe. Until next time, stay safe, stay witchy. Bye. Right.
Bye.